So this is lecture 4, and it's a talk I gave at the New Mexico Geographic Information Council last year, and it's called At Least 10 Reasons You Should Be Using QGIS. And I thought this would be helpful for everyone to hear since you're just getting to know it. I know I've made some comparisons between Esri and QGIS at this point, and I just want to let you know I'm really not trying to get you to stop using ArcGIS. I, in fact, use ArcGIS still in certain use cases. But I think this quote by Gretchen Peterson is really important. She's a famous cartographer, and she recently tweeted, "I'd posit that the average time during which your geo skills remain relevant without additional learning to be about 2 years. Think file formats, software, and libraries, for example. Stats, geoprocessing fundamentals, etc. have a longer shelf life, but in general you must keep up." And I think following open source is a big part of this. In a couple years, everything you know will have moved on to something else in terms of the technology. And so I just want to increase your toolbox so it helps you keep up in your career. And as I mentioned, there's not just one source for geo solutions anymore. So this is the first thing I asked people at the NIMJIC meeting, are there any Mac users in the audience? And I imagine there's some people in the class who are Mac users. And the good news is that if you're a Mac user, you can run QGIS natively on your Mac. You don't have to install Boot Camp or anything like that. You can just install it. And we've been through this, all the different operating systems that QGIS will run on, plus it's 64-bit. So that's reason number 1. We've covered this one a little bit too, the interoperability. And so I'm not going to spend time now on it, but that's reason number 2. Part of number 2, though, is a new feature, the Unified Data Source Manager, which is how you add data to QGIS in version 3. So now you're looking at the Browser tab, which has a project home location for where your project's saved. And I'm first adding data from something called a geo package, which comes in styled. I have parks, which is a shape file. Now I'm adding roads from a geo database. And now I'm adding something filming locations from a GeoJSON file. So this shows some of that interoperability, adding 4 different file formats all at the same time. And just to take another look at this data source manager, it does have other options for adding vector, raster, database connections as well. And this geo package format, which I add first, shows a new feature. You're able to store the styling for a layer, the symbology for the layer, with it in the GeoPackage format. So when I add that zoning GeoPackage layer, it comes in symbolized already, which is kind of interesting. And this Unified Data Source Manager also recognizes Python scripts, processing models, composer templates for maps. So it's a pretty robust feature. Another part of this interoperability that QGIS has is the Database Manager, which I've shown you a little bit of. But it allows you to browse through here, in this case, layers in a geo package, and preview them. Now I'm browsing to a PostGIS database and previewing that data. It gives you some information or lets you preview the geometry. And as I mentioned, it has a SQL editor. So I can go in here and write some SQL if I want to. Reason number 3. There are 145 base maps available with this one particular plugin called Quick Map Services. If you compare that to ESRI and ArcMap, which has 12, there's a huge difference. And all of the ESRI base maps are available here as well. So it's an amazing assortment of base maps that you have at your disposal, which will all project on the fly as well. So this is a neat one, the Stamen watercolor base map, which is kind of unique. This is Google Terrain. Underneath that, Google Road, Map Surfer, Esri National Geographic, OSM for OpenStreetMap. Number 4 is geoprocessing, which we've covered a little bit. In fact, we've looked at this same slide, but there's, suffice to say, a very robust geoprocessing environment, which includes a toolbox, a modeler, a Python console, and batch processing. Reason number 5, cartography and data visualization. We haven't gotten into much yet, but this is where QGIS really is starting to shine. It has one of the best color pickers here that I've ever seen in any piece of software. It lets you, in this case, sample colors from anywhere on the desktop. It lets you pick colors by hue, saturation, and value, red, blue, green, and blue. It has the color wheel. It has palettes of colors. So it's really quite fantastic. And on the right, you're looking at the table of contents, and if you right click on a layer in the table of contents, you get that same color wheel popping up so that you can choose a color for a layer interactively right there without having to open up layer properties or anything like that. So again, a lot of cases where it requires fewer clicks. The interactive styling dock, which I've shown you, and this was developed by Nathan Woodrow, and it's been around for a couple years at this point, but it's addictive. As soon as you start working with this, you can make live changes to your colors and symbols and see them right away without having to click OK, OK, OK to see the result. So Niall Dawson said, "I've said it once and I'll say it again. Madman Wu's QGIS style dock is the single greatest advance in cartography since Mercator's discovery of the North Arrow in 1972. QGIS Renderers, we're continuing with point number 5. It has the single symbol categorized and graduated renderers that you've seen and used to make choropleth maps and things like that. But QGIS also has this thing called inverted polygons, which I've talked about once. A 2.5D renderer. For points, you can displace points that are close cartographically. You can cluster points that are close. You can render points as a heat map, just in the way they're rendered. You can render a DEM as a hillshade. And then there's a whole suite of sub-renderers, which we will get into during the data visualization lab. I've also talked about inverted polygon Shapeburst fill, so I'm not going to spend a lot of time on it here again, but this shows you live how that is done. I have layer properties open on the right here, which again is going to look a lot like layer properties in ArcMap, but instead of having the tabs go across the top, you have the tabs going down the left-hand side. And I'm making the changes in layer properties and applying them to the map. This is another example of using an inverted polygon Shapeburst fill for highlighting a study area, in this case Baltimore City. And you can see the effect as I turn that layer off and on. The way I have this layer set up, it's focusing the visual attention on Baltimore City and causing the rest to drop into the background visually. Blending modes, we've covered that too with this same GIF, but here you're seeing that there's 13 different blending modes shown on the left-hand side, and we only looked at multiply. So there's quite a bit of potential here to use blending modes. Live layer effects. So with QGIS, you can also apply effects to vector layers. So you can apply an inner glow or an inner shadow or an outer glow or a drop shadow to your features. So here's an example of applying drop shadows and outer glows to the cities around Albuquerque. You can also copy and paste styles. So if I right click on Arizona counties and copy the style, I can right click on the New Mexico counties and paste the style. And here it doesn't just paste the layer symbology, it also brings with it any other layer styling you have, like labels in this case. Okay, so that was all number 5. Now we're going to move on to number 6, expressions and functions. So QGIS has a really rich expression builder with lots of functions that go way beyond just string and number functions. You'll see that there's functions for color and conditionals, date and time, and along with the other ones that you're probably used to in ArcMap. And these expressions are available throughout the interface. You can use them to query attribute tables, but you can also use them to create labeling expressions, rule-based styling, And we're going to get into these things called data-defined values, but they're really quite powerful. Number 7, variables. QGIS lets you store variables globally at the project level or the layer level. And a variable is just any constant. So you might store a conversion factor from square feet to square meters, or you could store your name as cartographer, or the project path is one that comes with QGIS by default. So here's an example of using variables in the print composer. So here I have my text on the map, and instead of typing out my name as cartographer, I plug in the @cartographer variable, and it populates the cartographer's name automatically. Same with the file path and the file. So it's populating these automatically without me having to type those in, just by using variables. Number 8, geometry generator symbol layers. So this is one of these sub-renderers that I mentioned earlier. And this is a little more advanced, but it basically lets you change the geometry of a layer, for example, from line to polygon or polygon to point, based on an expression. So for example, here I have game management units in Colorado. I'm going to duplicate the layer, which makes another copy of it, and move that copy to the top of the table of contents. And I'm working in the layer styling dock on the right, and I'm going to choose simple fill and choose a sub-renderer of geometry generator. I'm then going to choose the geometry type of point. It gives me $geometry, which is the geometry of my features, and I'm applying the centroid function to it. So I'm just wrapping geometry into the centroid function, and boom, I've got points as the centroids of my feature, just in the way the data is being rendered. Number 9, virtual layers. This is kind of similar. It allows you to define a layer based on a SQL query. And you can do it whether this layer is in a spatial database or not. So for example, I'm using this expression at the top to create points from a mountain lion, comma, delimited file. So I'm choosing the file that I want. And now at the bottom, I'm going to put the query in, which is making points from its two columns, UTMX and UTMY. So something that's just in a comma delimited text file is now going to be rendered as points. And the interesting thing about this is that it's live. If a new point gets added to that CSV, that point will show up on the map. This is a very simple use case of virtual layers. You can do quite a bit more with them. Number 10, some things are just easier. So for example, reprojecting layers. And you don't have to open up a tool to do it. You can just right click on a layer and open up the Save Layer As dialog box. At that point, you can choose a different file format. You can choose the coordinate reference system that you want to reproject it into. So you can transmute all these different parts of a layer and just export it to the new system. I'm going to let this animation reboot because I'm going to show you one other thing as it loops around again. So first, again, I'm choosing the file format. I'm choosing GeoPackage in this case. Or no, I'm choosing Esri File Geodatabase actually. Just showing you all the options. Then I'm going to open up the coordinate reference system selector, and notice down here you get a preview of the valid extent of that coordinate reference system. Next, I'm choosing Save Only Selected Features, and I can even choose which attribute columns I want to be pulled into the new layer. So that's the very simple way to reproject a layer and convert file formats at the same time. Number 11 is rapidly growing. So since there's a new stable release every 4 months, there's constantly new features coming online. There's a lot of help resources. It's not the case anymore that things are not documented or are hard to figure out. Besides the QGIS online documentation, there's blogs, listservs, books, YouTube videos, etc. Number 13, you're joining a community. So this is a fantastic community of people that are nice to work with and just feel good. Number 14, all this, and it's free and open source. Again, GIS is just a set of tools, so why not have a fuller toolbox? So for example, sometimes you're in an ArcGIS shop, but you need the erase tool, and that's only licensed at the ArcGIS Pro license level. So if you need that, you can just use the difference tool in QGIS for free. So even if you have ArcGIS, I think you'll find places where QGIS fits into your workflow. Plus, you have nothing to lose, monetarily at least. You're not going to pay anything for it. You can just download it and try it. Plus, with QGIS, if there's a feature you need, you can build it or sponsor it. I've been through this example of paying for and sponsoring this new paletted unique values renderer for raster data. So again, it's a very empowering personal example of how easy it is to get a new feature added to QGIS. So I hope that helps explain some of the paradigm behind working with QGIS and in how sophisticated of a piece of software this is. When we get into working with it more and more in the next couple of weeks, I think you're really going to see how polished and sophisticated this software is.